The twins were conceived through the use of the dark side of the Force, but the real question we should be asking here is why?
The M count is very high. Extremely high.
We're led to believe it's to the benefit of the Coven, but what if that's not totally the case? The situation with the twins appears to be vastly different to that of Anakin's. However, clues point to a common thread connecting the two.
Where did they come from?
So grab your lightsabers and dive in as we explore the mystery surrounding the twins.
The power of two.
But before we get into that, don't forget to leave a thumbs up on the video if you enjoy it, and if you want to catch more of our Star Wars videos just like this one, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's get into the Sith's grand plan with the twins.
Someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy.
Easy, Colleen.
Help! Mama, help!
Osha!
Help me!
Episode 7 saw us return to a pivotal moment in the story, Brendok, 16 years prior to the show's main timeline. The episode proved to effectively be a part 2 of episode 3, however this time around we saw the tragedy unfold from the perspective of the Jedi, or Master Soul as opposed to Osha. So we saw more of the truth. Effectively what went down on Brendok was a huge misunderstanding. The Jedi are there on a mission to survey the planet and look for a possible Vergence in the Force, came across Osha and May and believed them to be in immediate danger.
I fear for the girl's safety.
They knew the Coven was preparing for some kind of ritual that involved the twins shortly, and what's more, once they did get both twins onto their ship for testing, May throws further fuel onto the fire by dropping in that everyone within the Coven needed to be sacrificed. However, May herself completely misunderstood what Mother Anastasia meant here, and the Jedi took it at face value. What the Wish Mother actually meant was everyone needed to sacrifice a part of themselves. Anyway, the Jedi arrived with no intention for conflict, however things became heated and some of the Coven were just itching for a fight, which eventually broke out once Sol killed Anastasia, thinking she was about to harm one of the twins, and with the Witch Peacekeeper gone, Coral stepped in and all hell broke loose. Kelnucka ended up being possessed, with Sol and Torbin having to fight him. In the end, Indara jumped to the rescue and through the Force severed the Coven's control over Kelnucka, which also bizarrely resulted in their deaths too. Anyway, once this all said and done, Sol wanted to tell the Council everything, but he's convinced not to. Osha had lost her entire family. If Sol took the blame for Brendok, she wouldn't be his Padawan either, and she'd also lose the dream of becoming a Jedi. Now, ever since episode 3, we had the idea that there might be a little bit more to these twins than meets the eye, and it's pretty early on in the series where it's hinted that they were conceived through the use of the Force, and just like Anakin, there was no father, which got a lot of people up in arms, but as it turns out, the situation with the twins is totally different, and far more troubling, which we'll come onto in a moment. Anyways, we learned Mother Coral carried them, and Mother Anastasia was the one responsible for putting them there.
And what happens if the Jedi discover how you created them?
Now, in episode 7, we find out the Jedi aren't on Brendok because they're spying on the witches, seeing what they're up to. That comes a little later, but they're actually on Brendok in the first place because they're looking for that Vergence in the Force. Now, a Vergence is essentially a concentration of immense Force energy, usually found around a location, but it can also be found around an object or even a person, as was the case with Anakin.
A Vergence, you say?
Located around a person?
Now, the Jedi say Vergences in the Force can also create life where there is none. Anyway, it turns out Brendok was pretty much a dead planet until fairly recently. Within the story of the High Republic, there was a great event called the Hyperspace Disaster, which rendered Brendok and so many more worlds completely void of life. However, the fact that all of a sudden it's teeming with life is what attracted them there in the first place. If there is indeed a Vergence present, they wanted to study its immense force powers anyway. Our return to Brendok pretty much confirmed that the twins were created artificially, and due to the witches lacking the power to pull that off themselves, they drew the power from the Vergence to do so. Now, this is where the twins differ from that of Anakin, but they're also more closely tied at the same time than it seems on the surface. Anakin was the prophesized chosen one. He was created by the Force, not through someone using the Force, which means unlike the twins, he wasn't created by utilizing the power of a Vergence. In fact, he was a Vergence in the Force himself, which is ironic really. Force Vergences are able to create life, whereas Anakin, especially as his time as Darth Vader, mostly took it. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, the Force created Anakin with the sole purpose to bring balance, and he was conceived at a time where the scales of light and dark were tipping too much towards the dark, so he was brought in to put him back in balance effectively. Now, the reason the scales of light and dark were tipping in the first place, and this is where it all begins to play into the creation of the witches, is because a powerful Sith Lord at that time, who went by the name of Darth Plagueis,
A plan that is difficult to see. Some sort of shift. Something to tip the scales.
had an invested interest in the ability to create life. and we actually learn a little bit about him when Palpatine tells Anakin about him in Revenge of the Sith. Now, Plagueis was said to be
so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
Now, in Legends, Darth Plagueis attempted this ability around the time Anakin was conceived, as he wanted to create a being with immense power within the Force to wield as a tool for the Sith. However, on this occasion, the Force resisted his manipulation and instead, as suggested by Plagueis himself, created Anakin to counter him. But Plagueis didn't stop there. In fact, just as the Sith before and after him, one ability Plagueis also coveted was the ability to create a dyad in the Force between two beings. Now, this is actually a technique known to the ancient Sith that over time become lost, but the Sith harnessing this power saw it as a pathway to their ultimate goal, eternal life.
A power like life itself.
Which is something we see Palpatine pursue within the Bad Batch and the Rise of Skywalker. And speaking of Palpatine, Plagueis, his master, actually once tried to create a Force dyad between himself and a young Palps. So you get the idea of just how much this dude was interested with this stuff. Now, if we take a moment to remember exactly what Palpatine said to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, where he says
he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
Palpatine implies this is actually an ability Plagueis could do and pull off. It wasn't just something he tried once that didn't work. It just means on this occasion, when he tried it and the Force answered back with Anakin, it didn't work. So Plagueis has tried this before and had success, and this is why the twins being revealed to have been conceived via the Force rather than the more traditional method, in a story that takes place in what's been labelled a Sith-led show set during a time where Plagueis would have been alive. Wasn't as big of a shock to me as it was for some. You see, the Acolyte puts across the idea that the witches of Brendok utilise the power of the Vergences to create life to benefit themselves, and episode 7 reveals that in the process of doing so, they created one consciousness. However, this consciousness actually ended up being split into two separate beings, and I think this was a mistake.
How were they created?
Obviously, this isn't a power they've used before, because for starters, they wouldn't have needed to because they've only been pushed to the outskirts of the galaxy fairly recently. They didn't risk extinction before then, and secondly, the show makes sure to tell us that Osha and May are the only children in the Coven, so it's not exactly a Force-conceived child production line they've been operating over there. Now, although there was no sign of them in either of the flashbacks, and when you come to think about it, why would there be, especially in episode 8 as it was told from the perspective of the Jedi, I think the Sith of this time actually had a connection to these witches, and what we're actually seeing here is one of the Sith's, perhaps even Plagueis' earliest attempts to create life, with the twins effectively being a prototype for the kind of being Plagueis was attempting to create when the Force answered back with Anakin. And what's more, in the process of these experiments, if we can call them that, with the twins effectively being one consciousness split into two, what they've also inadvertently created is a dyad in the Force, yet another ability that Darth Plagueis was known to be very interested in. This would also explain the use of Kylo Ren's theme played at points during the show, as Kylo was one half of the only other Force dyad we've seen in Star Wars before. Now, a long-running theory I've had, and you might have seen this in my other videos if you checked them out, is that Qimir is actually the live-action canon version of Darth Plagueis himself.
A Jedi like you might call me Sith.
There are a ton of clues there, such as his Cortosis helmet, which Plagueis in Legends was known to mine for with his master Darth Tenebrous, all the way to his mysterious island that conveniently has been left without a name in the series so far, pretty much matching the description of the planet in Legends called Beldemnik, and like Beldemnik, the planet in the Acolyte also has Cortosis beneath its surface. Now, Cortosis isn't common, and I feel they've held back the name of this planet for a reason, as in the old novels, it's actually the location where Darth Plagueis slayed his Sith master Darth Tenebrous. There's tons of other clues, like the fact that Qimir told Osha in episode 6 that he wanted the power of two, and the showrunners have since elaborated on that, as initially I thought he meant the power of two, going back to the possibility of the twins being a dyad within the Force, and Qimir wanted to harness it himself for eternal life. But the showrunner has come out and said it's actually the Sith rule of two he's referring to here. So this guy, despite what many people have said, is following Sith tradition. I do deep down think he could also be referring to a Force dyad as well though, giving that line a dual meaning, but we'll see. But for all the other clues, if you're interested, I'll link the video at the end of this one. Now, if it does turn out to be the case that Plagueis had a hand in the twins' creation, this would also go part of the way to explain as to why he wasn't able to pull off the experiments in later years, as the witches were all wiped out by the Jedi. But what's more, it could also go somewhat away to explain why, out of all the inhabitants in the galaxy, Qimir, if he is indeed Plagueis that is, bound mate and Asaya, a child conceived by the Force, the very ability he's interested in, to train as his acolyte, and why when he had a chance to kill Jedi-trained sister Osha, he instead decided to take her back to his secret island hideout. I think it's pretty clear he's got an interest in these twins that goes beyond training them as a one-day Sith apprentice. Besides, throughout the course of the show, neither twin has shown as of yet an exceptional amount of ability within the Force, despite Torbin in episode 7 reporting at a high midichlorian count. Anyway, do you think the Sith are secretly behind the Force-conceived birth of the twins on Brendok? Or do you think this whole idea came solely from the witches? As always, drop your thoughts, theories and wilder speculations down in the comments below. Remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to catch more of our Star Wars videos, make sure to keep locked to the channel and subscribe. Alright, I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you always.